Welcome to Your Gal Friday, a podcast about female leaders, innovators, and rule breakers. Each week, your hosts will shine a spotlight on an amazing gal and talk about what we can all learn from her. Brought to you by Gal's Guide to the Galaxy. Welcome to Your Gal Friday. I am Dr. Leah Leach.
And I'm Phoebe Freer.
Today we are talking about a gal who hails from Brooklyn, New York, works in D.C., and is notorious. She's the 107th Justice to the U.S. Supreme Court and started as a lawyer for women's rights. We're happy to be releasing this episode on her 86th birthday. So happy birthday to your gal, Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I'm sorry I interrupted, but I was really excited.
I know, we've got a birthday gal in our midst.
Do.
This is a first.
Today is her birthday, and it's super cool. We get to release this on her birthday, and we don't have to talk about how she died, because that's always sad. Like, she's alive and with us, and like, happy birthday. Anyways, we're a little excited today. Very excited. I had a little coffee today, too, so yeah, it's gonna be fun. Yes. All right. So when I first heard of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it was actually from my running friend Liz. I was actually at her house after we ran a half marathon together. It was both of our first half marathon, and we were both kind of zombies, but it was good. It was fun.
It was a good zombie. It was a tired, we did a thing zombie. Yes.
Absolutely. So we were chilling at her house, and her husband were watching Saturday Night Live. And it was specifically the episode where Kate McKinnon played Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Nice.
Now, I avoid the news and politics pretty much at all costs. So I never heard of RBG before this, which is kind of embarrassing. But Liz and her husband excitedly gave me a 2-minute rundown before we watched the sketch, and I was amazed. It was, oh my gosh, just by the way they portrayed her in the sketch, it was like, okay, she's cool. Me and Leah both watched the documentary on Hulu, just entitled RBG.
Yes, and it is a great doc. I highly recommend it to everybody.
Good. I think it was made just last year, so it's very, very up to date.
And it was just nominated for an Academy Award. It did not win, but it was nominated for an Academy Award.
That's right. So in that documentary, they actually showed Ruth Bader Ginsburg watching the Saturday Night Live clip, which was really fun for me because I'm like, that's how I know you. And she was like laughing at herself, and they were like, is that anything like you, how you are? And she's like, no, but it's great.
Right. She thought it was funny.
She did.
Didn't think it was like her at all, but she thought it was funny.
Yeah, which, oh my gosh, just says a lot about a person to me.
Yeah, I dig it.
I digress. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, so let's start back to the beginning.
Yes. How did she start off? Where did she grow up?
Well, Ruth was born as Joan Ruth Bader on March 15th, today, 1933. It's so cool we could release this episode on her 86th birthday.
Woo!
Yes. So she was born in Brooklyn, New York. Her parents were Cecilia and Nathan Bader, and she described in the documentary that she is a first-generation American on her father's side and second-generation on her mother's. I thought this was a really cool way to put it and very eloquent, so I kind of had to quote her on that. Yeah. Now, her mother was Austrian Jewish, and her father was a Jewish immigrant from Odessa, Ukraine, which, if you think about it, I feel like there's nothing more American than coming from somewhere else completely. So I thought that was a really cool starting point for her. Yeah. So Ruth had an older sister who died from meningitis when Ruth was just over a year old. Now, Ruth described her as a kick baby, and so her nickname growing up was actually Kiki, which is kind of cute.
Adorable.
Right? And that was her nickname until she started school. Now, in her class, there were several other girls with the name Joan, so her mother suggested that she go by Ruth instead to avoid confusion. And I guess it just stuck from there. Yeah. Ruth grew up in a Jewish household, which is interesting to me given some of her political views, honestly. Yeah. But Ruth learned Hebrew and acted as a young rabbi. Like the woman of the season so far, Ruth's mother took an active role in her education, making sure she got the best. Now, she graduated high school at just 15 years old. Her mother taught her the value of being a lady and yet being independent. Now, what that meant was being a lady, as in controlling your temper, speaking calmly and kindly and yet strongly. Now, being independent, meaning if you find a soulmate, then that is great, but do well enough for yourself that you can take care of yourself. Now, Ruth's mother struggled with cancer all through Ruth's high school years. It was said in the documentary that maybe she was fighting hard to get Ruth through high school before she passed on. And she did just that. Ruth missed graduation day because of her mother's passing just the day before.
So sad. It's like bittersweet. You know
It
what I
really
mean?
is,
Like,
yeah.
she made it. She got there. But just like a
just
day or
a
two
day.
short of the ceremony. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Exactly. Well, Ruth went to Cornell University, where she was awarded a full scholarship. At Cornell, she would meet three men who would influence her life. One was Professor Vladimir Nabokov, who, according to Britannica, quote, shaped her thinking about writing. Another was Professor Robert Cushman, who inspired her to become a lawyer, as he himself was a constitutional lawyer and saw great promise in her. The third was Martin Ginsburg. Marty was not a professor. He was a student, just like Ruth. And in the documentary RBG, Ruth herself says of meeting Marty, quote, "That was the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me." And I just think that's so cute.
It is so cute. I loved watching the documentary just to see her and Marty together, honestly.
Yeah.
I'm a romantic. I'm sorry, guys.
Exactly. She also said, quote, "He was the first boy I ever knew that cared that I had a brain." Oh, that's romantic.
For real. And she said she tried dating, like she dated a bunch of guys before this, which I thought was pretty fun.
Never had a second date for
Yeah.
a long, long time.
Yeah.
Or, well, you know, for the first, what was it? She said the first semester. She
yeah.
never had a second date with anybody.
Yeah. Hearing her describe that was hilarious and awesome.
Exactly. But when she met Marty, the two of them fell in love. They were married 9 days after Ruth's graduation from Cornell. And the newlyweds were soon packing up their things as Marty was drafted into the U.S. Army. Ruth and Marty made a home in Oklahoma, where they were stationed. In that time, Ruth gave birth to her first child, Jane.
Aww.
Exactly.
So Marty resumed, and then Ruth began school at Harvard. Now, his undying support for her gives me great hope for my future, honestly. And for
It is possible, yes.
oh my gosh, yeah. It's like, oh. Okay, anyway. He was so proud of her in her studies. In fact, he's the one who said that she'd make the law review. And he was very, very adamant and very sure of this. And 2 years later, she did. Now, to me, this is very important because if you dig deep into Ruth like we have, you'll see that, like, she's a very strong voice, but she stands up for rights as a whole, but she doesn't always stand up for herself. So she had Marty to stand up for her in multiple different situations. And it wasn't like, oh, she can't do this without me. It was, let me help her do this because I know she can. So
they were better as a team. Honestly,
Yeah.
they were a yin and yang. They were a complete team all together for each other's
Absolutely.
best success. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I love them.
Now, when they were both at Harvard, Marty got cancer, and he was very worn out from radiation. Ruth took care of him, studied, cared for their child, and helped him with his own homework all at once. She got like 2 hours of sleep. I have no idea how she survived.
Right? It was a lot.
Now, I barely sleep too, but I feel like I'm barely surviving, and she's like thrived. I don't understand it, but I love
Right?
it.
She was driven. She's like, this is what's got to be done. You know what I mean? All hands on deck. This is what you do.
Yep,
You hunker down and
exactly.
do the work. Yeah.
Yep. Now, at Harvard, there were only 9 women. She said it certainly felt like you were always being watched, and that you had to be as perfect as you could, because she felt as if she wasn't only representing herself, but representing all women. Now, the dean of Harvard Law reportedly asked the female law students to attend this special dinner, which they agreed to, and they all were very excited and thought it was very important.
Right.
Ruth
It's the
said it-
dean. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, Ruth said it was a nice gathering. It felt good up until the end, where he individually asked every woman, "Why are you at Harvard Law School taking the place of a man?" Some say it was unjust, but even unjust, can you imagine what that would do to your morale, your self-worth, your dignity? Like, come on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That was. Oh.
I'd be mad.
That is a very difficult and awkward situation to be
Absolutely.
in, regardless of its intention. Right.
Absolutely.
It sends a message. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, Marty did eventually recover from radiation, thank goodness, and he recovered from cancer, and he got a new job in New York City. Now, at the time, it made the most sense for the family to move there, and Ruth transferred to Columbia to finish her studies. Now, Ruth said at this time it made most sense to support his career at this point in time, and when the time came, he fully supported her and did the same. Now, they had a marriage that was more progressive than its times, I would say. Each party of equal importance, each taking jobs, each taking care of the family. In fact, when Ruth's daughter was 14, she said that she tried her father's cooking and Ruth was then banned from the kitchen for the rest of her life. Literally, Jane cooks for Ruth every month and gives her frozen meals. Like, Ruth is not allowed to cook anymore.
What was it? Her daughter said, "I didn't see a live vegetable until the age of 14."
Yeah, that's exactly what she said.
It could have been her son as well, but I was
no, yeah, that's exactly what was said. Yep,
it's adorable.
Exactly. So Marty was such a good cook that he collected cookbooks and even wrote his own. Marty
Awesome.
also had a great sense of humor to balance out Ruth's almost too serious vibes, which, like, I'm almost too serious, but I'm never as serious as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I tend to get, like, hyper-focused and serious, and so I appreciate people who are, like, goofy and balance you out, so.
But no, I absolutely love that, too, because it is it is lovely to be able to be driven, to be serious, to be focused, but then to have that person in your life to lighten the mood. You know what I mean? To kind of like bring you back to center, to kind of be like, all right, you're going way far in the red here.
Right.
Let's bring you back.
Let's bring it down a notch.
So when Ruth and Marty moved to New York, Ruth struggled to find a job, though. She said, quote, "When I graduated from Columbia Law School in 1959, not a law firm in the entire city of New York would employ me." Now, keep in mind, Ruth was in both the Harvard Law Review and the Columbia Law Review. And to make the Law Review, what that means is you are in the top 25 people of your class. And these are not small institutions. This is Harvard and Columbia.
Yeah.
Also, when Ruth graduated from Columbia, she was tied for first in her class. I mean,
oh my gosh.
First, and she was having trouble finding a job. She struggled because she was not only a woman, but she was a mother, and not many women lawyers at the time even existed, and even fewer of them were mothers of young children. Now, she had awesome support from Marty and also the law professors at Columbia. They convinced Judge Edmund Palmieri of the U.S. District Court of the Southern District of New York to offer Ruth a job, and Ruth served as a clerk from 1959 to 1961. After her clerkship, Ruth worked as an associate director of the Columbia Law School's project on international procedure. This project involved researching Swedish law practices, and her findings were published along with co-writer Anders Brujäs in a book called Civil Procedure in Sweden. Very nice, right? Published.
Very nice, yeah.
When that project was complete, Ruth went to become an assistant professor at Rutgers School of Law. And according to Britannica, quote, "She was asked by the dean of the school to accept a low salary because of her husband's well-paying job."
Seriously.
The hits just keep on coming, right? While at Rutgers, Ruth became pregnant with her son, James. She hid her pregnancy as long as she could because there was laws at that time that women could be fired just for being pregnant. She continued at Rutgers and she earned her tenure there, by the way. So that's very nice. It means they can't fire her. Yeah.
Right.
When her students in the late 60s were wanting a new course covering women and the law. And this opened the door for what Ruth is notorious for, women's rights cases.
I see what you did there.
I know. I love throwing in the notorious anytime I
Oh,
can.
yeah. Oh, my gosh, yeah. Now, there was a woman by the name of Anne Marie Boleyn, who was a recent graduate of Rutgers School of Law, who was trying to establish a feminist journal in the 1970s. Now, she wrote the first edition of the Women's Right Law Reporter, published it out of her apartment in Newark. She shared the idea for the journal with the women's group who wanted to help the publication become successful, and it was suggested that they turn to her school she recently graduated from. The women in the group met with the dean, James Paul, and he said that they would need to find a faculty advisor, find office space in the school, and raise their own funds. Now, this is where Ruth Bader Ginsburg comes in. She agreed to become the faculty advisor, and a space for the Women's Rights Law Reporter was found in an old building. Now, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was pretty active in making sure that this happened. Now, the other people involved in this movement included feminist activists, legal workers, and law students. The reporter examines legislative developments, significant federal and state court cases, judicial doctrines, litigation strategies, the lives and careers of prominent women jurists and legal profession, and other areas of law or public policy related to women's rights. I looked this all up so that I would get it correct because
Perfect.
I was just like, I'm just going to look up exactly what this means so that I don't butcher it.
Perfect.
Yeah, so the reporter finds the intersections between race, class, gender, and sexuality to be vital to the examination of the new legal developments affecting the lives of women. It is the oldest legal periodical in the United States, focusing exclusively on the field of women's rights law. With over 30 years of publication, the reporter has continued to cultivate the important legal dialogue. Now, the Women's Rights Law Report was moved to Rutgers campus in 1972 and became formally associated with the Rutgers in 1974. Like, oh, they finally went to they went to claim it as their own now.
Well,
As they do.
As you do.
Right. Now, Ruth spent years, decades even, of her life fighting small battles on sex discrimination. She believed that real true change comes gradually over time, not just with one quick decision. So she spent her whole life building so that sex discrimination would become a more prevalent issue in the court. Now, by the time she fought more complicated battles, she had the cases from her past to back her up. Because of this, she was able to have the backing she needed to co-author the first law school casebook on sex discrimination. Now, what a casebook is a type of textbook used primarily by students in law schools. Now, rather than simply laying out the legal doctrine in a particular area of study, a casebook contains excerpts from legal cases in which the law of that area was applied. Now, it is then up to the students to analyze the language of the case in order to determine what rule was applied and how the court applied it. So, casebooks sometimes also contain excerpts from law review articles and historical notes, editorial commentary, and other related materials to provide background for the cases. So Ruth Bader Ginsburg was really a perfect person to write about this particular topic.
Ruth was then brought in for a special project that the American Civil Liberties Union was working on to bring cases and legal support to the women's movement that was happening in the 1970s. Ruth was brought aboard the project as they were looking for cases that were heading towards the Supreme Court that would, quote unquote, make good law. So the model actually came from Thurgood Marshall as he was fighting for racial equality through the court system as well. So the team brought 6 cases to the Supreme Court. And the first was in 1973, and it was Frontiero versus Richardson. It was a case of a woman in the Air Force who was not getting a housing allowance unlike her male colleagues. She and Brenda Fang took the time to explain and give the lay of the land of what it was like for women being treated as second-class citizens. The 9 Supreme Court justices, according to Ruth and Brenda, were attentive and perhaps learning something new. And Ruth quoted Sarah Grimke, the abolitionist and women's rights advocate, by saying, to the highest court in America, quote, "I ask no favor for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our neck."
That is literally one of the my favorite quotes of all time. Like,
it is Sarah Grimke. Yeah, absolutely. That's where it comes
the name.
from.
Okay. I was trying real hard to look up who originally said that, and I Google was like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm like, yes, I know, but
she did say it, and she said it in a court document. But she is quoting, and she said in the testimony too. She
did say that she was quoting somebody, and I couldn't understand the name.
Yes.
Like, names are very hard for me to.
There you go.
Yeah.
Sarah Grimke is also from the Grimke sisters. There were actually 2 sisters who were abolitionists and fighting for women's rights as well.
See, that's so cool. That's like
they
the
are
best
fascinating.
way. That is the best concise way to describe feminism and women's rights and all that stuff. Like, that is the most concise way I've ever heard it put. Like, it's very simple. It puts it into perspective. It's like, no, this isn't an extreme. We just want to, like, be equal. We're not extremists.
Right. It's
we're
not better. It's not worse. It's just, stop trying to stop me.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Now, Ruth and her team, they won the case, and it allowed for female military personnel to be entitled to the same dependents benefits as their male colleagues.
I'm doing like a happy dance right now.
I know, right? It's like
I'm
celebration, winning. Yes.
I'm like, happy dance, yay.
Now, the team, even though they were doing a happy dance as well, they were really hoping for like sweeping change for women's equality. You know what I mean? Like, we won and now it's all changed and everything's equal. Like everybody hopes for that. But it was gonna have to be one case at a time. That's the way the law works. That's the way that culture changes. Right. We saw this in the civil rights movement as well. So it is what it is. The next case that they brought to the Supreme Court was the 1975 Weinenberger v. Weisenfeld. And it was a case where a woman had a normal pregnancy, but when she and her husband went to the hospital, she died of an amniotic embolism, and it was leaving Weisenfeld to care for his son as a single parent. When he went to the Social Security office asking what benefits a single parent could get, they told him that there was a mother's benefit, but he couldn't get that. Now, equality swings both ways. And Ruth and her team at the ACLU, they were fighting for equality for all. And they took this case to the Supreme Court and again won. And this case proved how gender discrimination hurts everyone. Absolutely. And it was a very, very smart case to bring to the court. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now, that's just 2 examples. Ruth would win 5 of the 6 cases that her and her team brought to the Supreme Court.
Wow.
Yeah.
Now, there are 13 appellate courts that sit below the U.S. Supreme Court. I also looked this up to make sure I would get it right. They are called the U.S. Court of Appeals. Now, the 94 federal judicial districts are organized into 12 regional circuits, each of which has a court of appeals. Now, this court's task is to determine whether or not the law was applied correctly in the trial court. Now, appeals courts consist of 3 judges, and they do not use a jury. Now, a court of appeals hears challenges to district court decisions from courts located within its circuit, as well as appeals from decisions of federal administrative agencies. Now, in addition, the Court of Appeals for Federal Circuit has nationwide jurisdiction to hear appeals in specialized cases, such as those involving patent laws and cases decided by the U.S. Court of International Trade and the U.S. Court of Federal Claims. Mm-hmm. Now, on November 20th of 1979, Judge Harold Leventhal actually passed away. But this left an opening on the U.S. Court of Appeals. This is why I'm telling you about all of this.
Yeah.
Now, Ruth was nominated by President Jimmy Carter on April 14th of 1980 for the U.S. Court of Appeals. She was confirmed by the United States Senate on June 18th of 1980 and received her commission later that day. Now, during her time as judge on the D.C. Circuit, Ruth often found consensus with her colleagues, including conservatives like Robert H. Bork and Antonin Scalia. Now, Antonin Scalia is actually her very good friend. She's had a very good relationship with him, but their opinions, according to the law, are completely conflicting. Like, they are the most unlikely friendship you could probably ever think of.
Oh, yeah. They're kind of like Frick and Frack. They are the odd couple. It's
absolutely.
Totally bizarre. But they get along very, very well.
They do. It's so funny. Now, her time on the court earned her a reputation as a cautious jurist and a moderate. She liked to bring people together in a consensus and a popular vote. Now, on June 28th, 1993, Justice Byron White retired from the U.S. Supreme Court, leaving a new opening. Now, it was said that there were many candidates, but Ruth's husband, Marty, made sure that people knew about Ruth and knew about her being a top competitor for the seat. Now, she is quiet, as we described earlier. She doesn't really pioneer for just herself, but her husband pioneered for her strongly.
I saw a thing where he basically he called his friends, and he had this little book that had a whole bunch of people's names in it, and they were joked about it. It made it sound sinister, but it's really just like, I have friends, I'll call them, like, you know what I mean?
I'll tell them about my wife. She's pretty cool. She should be doing this job.
Right. I'm going to tell the really important people that I just happen to know from my life.
Right.
And, that kind of works. It is about who you know.
It worked out. Yeah, exactly.
It got to the president. That's for sure.
It did. It got to President Bill Clinton, and he nominated her as the Associate Justice of the Supreme Court on June 14th of 1993. So he said that it was her interview that didn't. He was encouraged to meet with her by colleagues, by the people Marty influenced, of course, but the interview itself went from a president interviewing a potential candidate to two friends talking about the law. And he was hooked. This made Ruth the second female on the Supreme Court pretty much ever, right?
She was the second one. Yeah, exactly.
Second one ever.
Yeah, behind the, who I call OG, which is Sandra Day O'Connor. In this case would be original gal.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
Instead of original gangster. See, I'm just dropping all
you.
of the, yeah.
Well, we got to throw the little gangster stuff in every once in a while.
I'm just saying. OG Sandra Day O'Connor.
I love it. So, yeah, that's pretty much a big deal. You know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg being on the Justice of the Supreme Court. At the time, she was, what they say, in her 60s, and they considered her to be almost too old for the position. And so people were doubting that she would even get it. But Marty was like, no, that's pretty much bull. Like, she deserves this. And now
she can totally do the job. Yeah.
She can totally do the job, and she's still doing the job, and she's 86. So, I mean, I think that was a solid decision. So,
yeah.
Just my unbiased personal opinion.
Exactly. We're not like super fans or anything. Oh, wait, we are.
Oh, yeah. Oh, wait.
So now with two ladies on the Supreme Court, Ruth took her seat on the bench. And I looked at the cases. There have been a good number of cases that have come across the Supreme Court while RBG has been on the bench. But I grabbed a few of them to kind of paint a picture of her time in the Supreme Court. So there was the Ledbetter versus Goodyear case that came to the Supreme Court in 2006. Now, Justice Ginsburg at that point was the only woman on the bench. Now, our OG, our original gal, Sandra Day O'Connor, had retired earlier that year. Now, the case was about pay discrimination, and it was based on the fact that Ledbetter was getting paid less for the same work because she was female. Goodyear was the victor, and Justice Ginsburg voiced her dissent, which meant she did not agree with the court's majority vote. She explained to the court, once again, what it's like for women. She also challenged Congress to pick up where the court had failed when it comes to pay discrimination. And you know what? They did.
Yes. Yes.
The very first bill that President Obama signed when he took office was the Lilly Ledbetter Pay Restoration Act. And that was based on that court, right?
Oh my gosh.
Exactly.
I mean, I feel like our last episodes, I felt like discouraged about where we've come, like how far we've come in politics.
Right.
And like this time I'm like, okay, like it still sucks, but I feel encouraged because like we're still fighting and we got a fighting chance still. Like,
right. There is definitely an ebb and flow. There's a little forward and then there's a way back. And then there's, way forward and then some way back. You know what I mean? Like it is take it one at a time.
Yep.
Oh, yes. Another case was the 2013 Shelby County versus Holder. And that case was about race discrimination at the voting booths as removing part of the Voting Rights Act. Now, Justice Ginsburg dissented again, saying, quote, throwing out preclearance when it has worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. I loved that.
Oh,
it painted a
absolutely.
picture, and it was very stern. This particular dissent made her pretty popular on social media, and I will hand that over to Phoebe to talk about how that happened.
Absolutely. We'll get to the social media part in just a little bit. First, I want to tell you some fun things that Ruth Bader Ginsburg has gotten into. So RBG and Scalia, as we talked about before, has a meaningful friendship where they actually hang out and enjoy each other's company. They couldn't be more opposite, but their friendship remains strong. Now, in an interview, Scalia was asked about their friendship, and he said, quote, she's nice, she likes the opera, what's not to like? Except for her political opinions, of course. And they all laughed. Now, because of their unusual friendship and Ruth's deep love for the opera, there was actually an opera created based off of their friendship and their lives. It's this comedic opera entitled Scalia/Ginsburg, with the slogan, quote, we are different, we are one, an American comic opera in one act by Derek Wang Liberato. Now, it was launched at a special presentation at the Supreme Court of the United States in 2013. Now, Ruth also made a guest appearance in an opera, which is separate from the one about her. This opera is called The Daughter of the Regiment. It's an 1840 operatic rom-com by Italian composer. She had a speaking role as the queen, and she said that she basically wrote her own lines. Now, in the documentary RBG, you could see her beaming from ear to ear. It was so cute. Like, she was on stage.
It was very cute.
It was. She says that the opera is one place where she gets totally enthralled, totally enveloped. She doesn't think about her court cases. She doesn't think about the world. She's just in the moment, and it's beautiful.
It's her happy place, and it's also her, like, respite. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
She can take a break there. Yeah,
Absolutely.
I love that. Everybody needs to have that.
Absolutely. Now, 5 or 6 years back, Ruth was turned into a meme by a lost school student, which is what Leah was talking about. Now, this meme called her the, quote, notorious RBG, which was based off of the rapper, the Notorious B.I.G.
Yes.
Now,
I love both of them. What can I say?
Yeah, it's fair. Now, when asked about how she felt about this name, Ruth said, why would I be upset? He and I have a lot in common. We were both born in Brooklyn.
I love that.
Right? Now, because she has like a great sense of humor. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now, because of this new name, her growing popularity, and basically being a strong point in the women's rights movement, there are, of course, books and other such things about her life. Now, among those are the book entitled The Notorious RBG, published in 2015. Plus, there's a classical music album by the same name.
Oh, actually, I didn't know about the music. Nice.
Yeah, I tried looking it up and I found the music first. And I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Ooh,
Which
sweet.
I'm pretty sure that's also still separate from the opera, too. So there's like all of this like music and books and different things about her, which is pretty cool. I tried listening to it and then I'm like, I got like 10 minutes. I can't do it right now.
Right.
But yeah. Anyway.
Needs your full attention on it. Yeah.
Absolutely.
When you have time. Yeah.
Exactly. The Notorious RBG book was actually written by the Notorious RBG Tumblr creator. It's a collection of Ruth's life as a whole and includes an interview of Ruth even. There are other books as well, though, about Ruth, including one she wrote herself called In My Own Words. Now, Mary Hartnett and Wendy W. Williams also contributed to this book. So it talks about her opinions on the law, talks about her life, and much more. So Ruth also has a workout program written by Bryant Johnson. And that's all like in a book as well. And it's all about how RBG stays strong, and you can too. And it's like, it looks pretty fun. I'm almost scared to read it because she can do more push-ups than I can. And I'm
True.
like, I'm almost 25. I don't really have great excuse right now. So
gotta muscle up like RBG.
I know, right? I'm like, maybe I should take some notes. There was also a movie about her that was released of Christmas of 2018 entitled On the Basis of Sex, which I admit, when I first saw the posters, I really wasn't that interested in watching due to my lack of political involvement. But now I really wish I went and saw it in the theaters because it looks really cool now that I know what's going on and I understand the importance.
I tried. There was like 2 or 3 different times that it's like, okay, let's go see that on such and such night. And then that such and such night comes up. And it was either somebody was sick or somebody had to go somewhere. I had to drop, a kid off at a play,
right?
Or somebody wasn't feeling well, and it's like, oh man. And then by the time, and it was even Valentine's Day, we were thinking, okay, last chance, we're gonna go see it on Valentine's Day before it leaves. It was gone. It had already left the theater the Friday before Valentine's Day. And
that sucks. I hate it when that happens.
But
it did stay in the theaters for a good amount of time. But I
did, and I heard excellent things about it too, and I'm gonna see it.
Oh my gosh, I looked up the trailer today, and now that I know about her life, I was like, oh my gosh, they did that so well. Oh my gosh.
Right, exactly.
Like, oh my gosh, it's like the same, like they had the right feel to it, like after, oh man, I'm so
and
excited.
they did have her input, because I did watch interviews.
Okay.
So, but the weird thing was, her input was not about her character. She was very adamant about getting Marty's character right.
Oh,
that was her input.
Now I really want to watch it.
I know. So yeah, that was
That's
what
love
was
right
important
there.
to her.
That is true love right there. Oh my goodness. Actually, admittedly, that's why I wanted to watch the movie, because I want to watch how they portrayed their relationship. And now I really want to, because now I know they got it right.
There you go. Exactly.
Man,
or,
so
at least the real RBG told them how to do it, whether they did it or not.
Yeah, no, that's true. At least it's like as close as it could be for a movie like made about.
Exactly.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying. So the documentary we watched, RBG, it shows us all these collars that she wears. She said that the robes were designed to show the collar and tie typical from a man's suit. And so she and Sandra Day O'Connor thought it would be appropriate to add different collars that would be typical of a woman. Now she shows us beautiful different collars on this documentary that she wears at different times. Some for specific times, like announcing an ascending or a descending opinions. And she has other collars as well, and most of them are actually gifts to her from her friends or from travels and stuff. And my favorite one actually was the one from, I believe it was Hawaii, and it has the beads from the beach. So that one was my favorite.
It was like the lace and the beads. That was really, I thought that was gorgeous.
I thought that was
and
cool.
Sweet. So back to Marty for just a little bit, because they very much, their stories are yin and yang and intertwined and lovely. Now, Marty was a tax lawyer, and he practiced in New York. And in many interviews, people will talk about how fabulous he was at his job. I mean, there's not like, the best tax lawyer in town, they say that, but that's generally not a thing that anybody brags about. You know what I mean? It's kind of, it's not a very sexy job. Let me put it that way. It's tax law, but Marty was very good at it. He was also very supportive of his wife, and he showed an incredible sense of humor. And he would always say, quote, "I moved to Washington because my wife got a good job there." I mean, she's a Supreme Court justice, so it's,
yeah,
I would say, that's a pretty good job. Yeah. So from the video footage that I have seen, he's usually smiling and he's joking. And at her confirmation hearings for the Supreme Court, he's generally in awe of her. He really did love that braid of hers, and he really did take care of her. He did the utmost to make sure that she ate at least once a day and got at least a few hours of sleep.
Yep.
It was very cute, the struggle between, can you just get a few hours of sleep and one meal? Could you do that? It was cute.
It's so cute.
Unfortunately, his job of taking care of Ruth and making sure that she ate and got a couple hours of sleep was turned over to someone else because in 2010, Marty lost his battle with cancer. Now, Ruth knows cancer just too well. Having lost her mother and her husband to it, she has also had 2 cancer scares. The first was in 1999, and it was around that time that Justice O'Connor, again, the OG, she advised her to have her chemo done on a Friday so that she could return to work on Monday after having the weekend to be sick. Wow. Ruth would have a second cancer scare 10 years later. Yeah, right?
Oh my gosh.
Now, Ruth's workouts are almost as notorious as she is. Phoebe, you were talking about the book because there's a whole book.
There's a
you
whole
can do
book
the
about
workouts
it.
with her.
Yeah,
right.
You can. Mm-hmm.
Now, she started these workouts actually to build muscle strength back after her first cancer scare. So she very much was trying to get herself back in shape. And Stephen Colbert of The Late Show actually worked out with her.
So funny.
And he got his butt kicked working out with a woman in her 80s. And it was hilarious.
It was hilarious.
But yeah. She does 20 push-ups, and the gal also planks for 30 seconds. She holds it, and because it's more strenuous.
Nice.
So she is 86 years old today. And again, it is so cool that we get to release this episode on her birthday. And so in her own words on a possible retirement, she has said, quote, "I will do this job as long as I can do it full steam. And when I can't, that will be the time I will step down." Now, remember, Justice John Paul Stephen retired in 2010, and he was 90 years old. So y'all chillax. She's 86 today. Yeah. So we're good.
We're good.
I'm not worried. All right.
Yeah. Let's just say we're good.
Exactly.
She's fighting really hard for us, both physically and in the law, and in every which way possible, she is fighting for us, and it's very comforting to know.
Exactly. So even though she is still working, and she is still kicking all the butt, what legacy do you think she wants to leave behind that she's still working towards?
Absolutely. I think it's pretty much as simple as everybody should be treated equal and should be seen as equal through the law. I think that was her biggest legacy she wants to leave behind, is to let everybody, not just women, not just men, she's a big supporter of the LGBTQ rights, racial rights, racial discrimination.
Immigrant rights.
Immigrants, exactly. She wants every single person to be seen as equal by the law. Right. And that is very
commendable, I think
there
is the
it
word
is.
You're going
that
for.
That is what I'm going for, yes. I was I don't know what I'm trying to say, but that is very commendable and a very valiant effort. And I think that's simply all she wants.
Yeah. I'm going to cheat because I found her answer in an interview.
Of course you did. Of course.
It's unfair. I found it as I was looking through quotes
I
because
never
we
think
always
about doing that because
we end with a quote, and so that's the last thing that I do is look for a quote that kind of, sums up the, the life that we have learned about and stuff like that. And so it had this one about her legacy. So it's an interview, and it was with MSNBC, and it was in 2015. And she was asked what she would like to be remembered for. And so she responded, quote, "Someone who used whatever talent she had to do her work to the very best of her ability, and to help repair the tears in her society, to make things a little better through the use of whatever ability she has. To do something, as my colleague David Schauder would say, outside myself. Because I've gotten much more satisfaction for the things that I've done for which I was not paid." And I thought that was very interesting.
Wow.
And, you know what I mean? Very telling. Yeah. So, to do your best work because it's your best work, and that it's not about the money. And this is something that we have found a couple of times, you know what I mean, with the gals that we've covered. The legacy isn't the best at something, the most at something, For RBG, it's just, look, I can do this and it helps society, so I'm just going to do it. Cool?
Right. I love that. Wow.
Right, exactly. So yes, I cheated. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. You're fine. I was like, for some reason, so shocked. I'm like, I should get used to this by now. But I'm always like, oh wait, we usually research gals who were like so far back that we can't find interviews. So I'm always like, oh wow, I don't even think about it.
Yeah, either they don't ask or we haven't found or. Right. Yeah, exactly. It's an odd thing. And a lot of times it is just, our interpretation sort of thing.
Absolutely.
Which is any which way we come at it. But here's one that we can't Google and one that we can't necessarily cheat at. And it's our personal experience. So what did you personally learn from Notorious RBG here?
So personally, I think I learned baby steps. I
dig it.
Yeah, because she said that they wanted to change the women's rights movement, a lot, of course. But
yeah, instantly.
Instantly.
One fell swoop. Done. We fixed it. Equality for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. They want to. But she recognized the fact that that's not possible. And so she tackled it in such a way where she knew it was not possible to do it in one foul swoop. So she went and tackled individual, we'll call it baby cases for lack of a better term, even though they were still big deals. They were still a big deal, but they were small in comparison to what her end goal was. And for me, that's super inspiring because it's all about forward progression and baby steps. And, you might have a big goal in life. You might have this big dream, but the baby steps and the smaller stepping stones still matter. And you should plan accordingly to those stepping stones because they matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Make sure you're moving forward. Just keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
Whatever that particular way is. Yeah.
Yep.
I love it.
So what about you?
I learned once again, and I think it's something that I do not mind once again that I learned this over and over again because it's important.
Right.
We're all given special talents. You know what I mean? We don't have to be good at everything. I think that's important because I think, especially with women, we try to do everything and be everything.
Yeah.
And we're given special talents, and it's kind of that stay in your lane. Are you really good at something? Do that. That's what the world needs you. Are you comfortable doing that? Then do that and do it awesome. People will appreciate. Because also that's why we have friends, because our friends can be good at the things that we're not.
That's so
and
true.
we can rely on them. Yeah. And they can teach us and be like, no, that's cool, but you keep doing it because I'm going to keep doing this. So, I mean, you can also argue that's why there's more than one human being on the planet too. You know what I mean? We can all be good at different things. There's more than one of us. So no pressure. But RBG, she works really hard. She understands the law. I will say that is not a strong suit of mine. I look at a lot of law, dictation and documents and stuff like that as we go through different ladies of history. And I'm like, that is some gobbledygook.
Yeah, basically.
I don't understand some of this law language. She gets it. She loves it.
I was afraid to do Ruth Bader Ginsburg because I
the
don't
law
understand
stuff.
the law. I was like, I'm just going to quote verbatim because I have no idea what.
Right, exactly.
I can't reiterate this because I don't understand it. But
yes. And that is fair, but you understand her passion for it because that's universal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also love that she is soft yet commanding. She really is. She's small in stature. She looms larger than life, you know what I mean, in celebrity. She's like a paradox. Yeah. And I think I love that paradoxal, ness sort of thing about her because she reminds you to never judge a book by its cover.
Absolutely.
She is a case example of, what some could just glance and be like, this small little frail woman, she is on the Supreme Court. She is extremely important to our laws and way of life. And when the girl dissents, Congress and the people listen. It is a very powerful voice in this small little frame. Also, we have gotten through nearly the entire episode, and I haven't mentioned my cat.
I can't believe we did that. I can't believe we succeeded on that, actually.
Right? Exactly. So, ironically, the first day that the RBG documentary was released on Hulu, I gathered my daughters together and we started watching it. And my girls were totally entranced by RBG. They loved her. They loved her quiet strength. They loved her like power in a pocket-sized portion, basically. They loved seeing her speak truth to power. They were like cheering when she was doing her speeches and her dissent and her, yeah, exactly. They were loving it. So just before the documentary was over, though, my husband came home from work and he had with him a 4-week-old kitten that he found shivering on a country road with the temperatures that were dropping rapidly. This tiny little black kitten had a very fierce meow and very fierce eyes to go right along with them. So after confirming in my own court, one would say, we elected to have the kitten named RBG. It was a vote of 3-1. I will not point out who dissented.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
We did have one dissenter, and when I pointed out that one person was dissenting, that kind of like reconfirmed that the kitten's name was going to be RBG. And so we call it, when she was very, very little, because she's almost 4 months old now. When she was very, very little, we called her Baby Ruth. So, yeah, so Baby Ruth and RBG, and when we shout for her, when she's getting on microphones and getting into trouble, it's very fun to shout a 3-named name, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, get over here, you know, Sarah Jessica Parker, stop it, you know, like any three names is really certain. That's why your mother uses your full name when you're in trouble.
I have 2 middle names, so it's even more fun. Like when my mother uses my first middle name, I'm like, okay, I'm moderate in trouble. When she uses my full name, like all 4 of them, I'm like, oh my gosh,
you are
it's going down.
Death, basically.
I'm
Exactly.
Dead. Yeah.
You better run.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's on.
But yes, I will ridiculously post a picture of my kitten. And yes, of course, we have put dissent collars on her.
Oh my gosh, that's adorable.
She's very, very cute.
And she's black too, like the robe and stuff.
Oh yeah,
man,
she's fully black, and she's really like she has a very shiny coat. So it's kind of like the silk robes. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Sweet. Well, next week we are talking about a woman who knows why the caged bird sings, Dr. Maya Angelou. So until then, here's a quote from the notorious RBG. I'm sometimes asked when there will be enough women on the Supreme Court, and I say, when there are 9. And people are shocked. But there'd been 9 men, and nobody ever raised a question about that. For more information about this week's gal, visit galsguide.org. To support the show, visit the Gals Guide Patreon page. Thank you so much for subscribing and listening to Your Gal Friday.